What's up and welcome back to Interpreting the Stars, where today we're bringing it back to our Dr. Dolittle marathon and closing it out with 2020's Dolittle, starring Robert Downey Jr. Now he's out of his Iron Man suit. So this is definitely one of those movies that people consider to be one of the worst of the year already. But one of my favorite things to do is to provide my 2 cents to these films and give credit where credit is due, even if it is bad. Because a lot of people have a binary way of thinking. If the general public or even critics say a movie is bad, they assume everything about it is bad, nothing redeeming at all. And I don't think that's fair. Because if I'm making a movie, I know it's not going to be the greatest thing in the world, but I would hope that if you're going to watch my movie, that you'd be able to pick out what about it is good. So of course I was timorous about watching this film, but I was also crossing my fingers for the best. So let's get cracking. This review is brought to you by the word of the day, timorous, expressing or suggesting timidity, aka fearful. Dolittle focuses on Dr. Dolittle, a number of crazy animals, and a young man named Tommy who all must go out on an adventure to retrieve a special fruit that can save the Queen's life as she is seemingly dying from an incurable disease. So, as you know, I've gone back and I've watched the 2 Eddie Murphy Dr. Dolittle films in preparation to see this film, even though I know there's no real evident connection between the two. And I can tell you that, given the choice, I just stick to Eddie Murphy. I'll try to tell you why, but first, I want you to know that I do love Robert Downey Jr., and ever since Iron Man, I've always been trying to watch him in other stuff. A great movie he's in, for instance, is The Judge with Robert Duvall. His presence, in general, is just a lot of fun. Emphasis on in general. His performance as Dolittle, it doesn't work for me. It's like he's trying way too hard to nail an accent. I think it's supposed to be Welsh, but it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like a mixture of different English accents rolled into one, and it was just odd. Also, it never really seemed like his demeanor matched his dialogue, meaning that I felt the ADR work. He was often softly speaking or even whispering his dialogue, almost like he has no confidence in what he was saying, but his physical demeanor was more outward and active, so it didn't match as much. When it came down to the animals and how they speak, okay, one of the main things that I complained about in the Eddie Murphy films was that it's sometimes hard to believe that the animals were actually talking, because I feel like the CGI wasn't fully ready to morph those animal mouths, at least not in a way that looked real. On the other hand, I always believed that what I was looking at was actually animals. In Dolittle, all these animals are CGI, and you can tell they're CGI. You can tell because the CGI is not very good. And heck, there's not even that big of an improvement in the mouths of the animals over the 90s Dr. Dolittle films. Past that, let's take a look at the voices. Casting voices for animals can be a difficult thing to do, and creating personalities for the animals is probably even harder to do. But that's something that the Eddie Murphy films excelled in. I love the casting in those films and the personalities that they gave the animals. The beaver, who is actually a godfather, you know, the cheeks, right? The squirrely squirrel, the weaselly weasel, the dopey bear. Everything in those movies sounded perfect, actually. When it came down to this movie, the voice actors felt, well, like voice actors, they didn't feel specific to their animal. They were simply put Hollywood cameos, which is unfortunate. When it comes down to how the animals act, this is where things get weird, because the way the animals act and what they say and how they say it, it all feels very much like an Eddie Murphy film. Very much. If Eddie Murphy was in this movie, he'd have some really good charisma and chemistry with the animals. But Downey Jr. doesn't. He's got a very different sense of humor that doesn't mesh well with the animal's sense of humor. So it ends up feeling like a missed opportunity. When it comes down to the story, you have a typical adventure story, and that's actually probably the strongest thing about it. It's going somewhere. The story was always the weakest link in the Eddie Murphy films. It wasn't really about anything in the first film, and the second film was very on the nose, social commentary about saving trees, saving animals, and that affected the comedy. This 2020 film actually has an adventure story that these characters are trying to accomplish, and they all have their independent reasonings for being there. Sure, you'll find your plot holes to the story. One of the biggest ones is the fact that if Dolittle does not save the Queen, he won't have a home anymore. And why was that exactly? Because I don't actually remember. Why can't he just save the Queen? Because it's the Queen, and he's a doctor, and he feels the moral obligation to save lives. That I'm unsure of. It's like they added a level of importance there that seemed weird, but even so, it's still a story with a fair amount of obstacles and a narrative structure that, while it might be typical, it works. It's the glue for everything else. Let's sum it all up. From an unbiased perspective, it's not the greatest film in the world, but it does have a decent narrative structure, and it's at least attempting to diversify the characters and create a wide assortment of people, animals, and what they bring to the table, so my unbiased score was 58%. However, I found the film to be extremely underwhelming, and RDJ's weird, whispering, Welsh, Irish, Scottish, English accent, that took me out of it, and my bias score was 30%, bringing the total score to 44%. 44 out of 100 possible stars, granting it a failing letter grade of F. Overall, I'm not entirely sure why this film was made. I don't think it had enough in there to warrant being revisited, and as much as I like Robert Downey Jr. and heck, a lot of the rest of the cast, I don't think anybody felt born for the respective roles, and Downey Jr. specifically felt wrong to the role to me. And maybe that is just me. But I would like to hear your thoughts on it though. I know the mass majority isn't the biggest fan of this film, but in your opinion, what do you think is the strongest element of this film? Let me know below. As for YouTube, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button if you like this review and would like to see some others like it. Hit the thumbs up button because that always helps on my channel. And don't forget about the little bell icon because that'll help notify you when I come up with the next review. And until then, peace out!